Welcome back to Give Me Some Truth. I'm Polly Price, financial advisor here at Walkner Condon, and I'm joined today by Alicia Vande, financial advisor and CFP at Walkner Condon. And today we're kind of kicking off a series a series of like a topic that is really close to us, right? Obviously, but something we kind of wanted to dive deeper into over kind of a series of different podcast episodes. And we'll get into all of that in a little bit. But we came up with the concept of money with purpose. And that was after some brainstorming of what does it mean to have a conversation about women and finances or women in finance. We did, a little bit of brief research before this, and it's a very convoluted, very heavy topic, and it can be. And I think we agreed that this segment is not that. We don't want it to be that.
We want to reframe conversations about money so that they're easier to have and they're not boring or difficult, and maybe break some of the cultural and social taboos that not just women have around money, but just our society, right? People aren't supposed to talk about how much they make. People aren't supposed to talk about money. And there's a lot of circles where men feel comfortable talking about finances and investing, and a lot of women still don't. But people in general also still don't. There's a lot of taboo around it. So we want to reframe the conversations that we have about money to help people get more comfortable having those conversations, and also to make them more interesting by really tying those conversations to the goals, like the things that money allows us to do, whether that's sending our kids to college, retiring, taking a big vacation, being charitable, whatever it is, right? Money allows us to do the things that are important to us in life. And how do we talk about that and use money as a way to achieve those goals and have the conversation be more around that as opposed to dollar amounts, rate of return? And we can talk about those things too, but sort of tying those two things together to really show the purpose behind the money.
Yeah. And you and I, some of today's conversation will be a little bit more anecdotal than probably future episodes. But with that said, I think you and I kind of agreed upon before this that like both of us with or amongst our like separate friend groups, I talk about everything with my friends, right? Like we know everything about each other's lives,
intimate details.
Yes, and it's wonderful, and I really appreciate that about my female friendships. However, we don't talk about our finances. We maybe brush upon it in some ways in terms of like, oh, are you saving for your kids' education? Yes, no. And then the conversation kind of moves on. But we're not really talking about the ins and outs of this, very heavy topic, which covers every aspect of your life, right? Like you plan, I don't know about you, but when we're packing for a trip, I'm the one making the packing list, doing the packing for me and my daughter. You plan for everything in your life, or everything, if you're planning a trip, something like that. Why not, carry that into the rest of your life? Having that planning, sense of need, I feel like, is so important to women. So why is this not part of the conversations that we're having with our closest friends?
Yeah. And conversations that we're having with our spouse or partner too. So it's, yes, women are in these groups talking about everything except money oftentimes, but also even with their partners. And I see it with a lot of clients too. And it's not always the woman. Most of the time it is, where she's just like, I don't find this interesting. He handles the money. And I've definitely seen it come in the other way. I mean, that's my situation. My husband does not care. I try to sit him down once a year, and he just is like, can I retire early? I want to know when I can retire. And how we get there isn't really important to him. But what is important to him is the destination. And I think a lot of typically women tend to feel that way as well, is they want to know about the destination. They want to be able to take that trip. They want to be able to retire or pay for their kids' school, but they don't really, they don't find it interesting, that conversation of like, well, what are the steps I need to take to get there? Or they've just been kept out of that conversation. One thing we did in preparation for this is like, well, what does ChatGPT have to say, right? What does ChatGPT say when you say, why don't women want to talk about money? And the first thing was cultural and societal norms. And that's not just women, that's everybody, right? It's that taboo around money. Fear of judgment or criticism. I think people don't want to necessarily talk about something that they're unsure of or don't know about, maybe lacking confidence or knowledge around it. Because that was another thing, is like lack of financial education. So if you don't know a lot about a topic, you may not feel like you have anything to add to it. And so having just some base knowledge can get you started. But if you're not having those conversations, you're not going to get more knowledge, because I feel like it's through those conversations that you gain the knowledge, or you know the questions to ask, or maybe your friend knows something that you don't know. And that's how you gain that education, partially, is through those conversations.
Right. And going off of that, like women, whether they're, full-fledged part of that, investing conversation in their marriage, in their partnership, or, if they're women living by themselves, you might think, or a lot of that like lack of knowledge might begin where you're like, okay, I budget my money well. I know I'm saving, right? I know I'm saving. I know I'm budgeting. I know what I spend. I have a handle on that. Does that conversation then end there? And why does it end with just budgeting, right? So going off that point, like, yes, that is, financial education is also a big part of this. And if women aren't getting that financial education earlier in life, where are they getting it and how are they getting it? And is part of that going to be those conversations that you have with friends? Maybe, hopefully, right? And that's kind of back to the idea of, we want people to feel comfortable asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Whenever they're in a position where they're like making a decision about what type of, life insurance policy should they be getting, you should be comfortable asking the right questions and not feeling like you are going to be judged for that question that you ask, for your lack of knowledge, that quite frankly, it's like totally normal to ask questions.
The number of people who hear what I do and they're like, I have a really dumb question.
Yes.
They start with, I have a really dumb question. And people do ask dumb questions, but 9 times out of 10, it's not a dumb question though. It's not a dumb question. And if it's something that you don't know the answer to, you have to start somewhere. And if you're too afraid to ask the question because you feel, or you're afraid that it's a dumb question, then you're not going to get to the point where you know enough to then start asking the really smart questions. So I don't think those initial questions are dumb at all. They're just where you have to start. You have to start with the basics before you can get to the point where you're really digging in and asking the deeper questions of like, okay, I don't understand the difference between all these different kinds of life insurance, right? And that's maybe more that basic question. What's the difference between term and whole life? And then once you learn that, well, then you can start getting into the details of it and asking more specific questions. But if you don't even understand the general topic, you're never going to get there.
Right. I want you to look or read a little bit more of what ChatGPT said, because I just want to like have listeners understand like where it went with this topic.
Yeah. I mean, one of them talks about power dynamics. And I think this is, who historically has controlled the money.
Yeah.
Men, right?
Right. And we're not that far removed from that, right?
Well, you're not that far one generation removed, from where women
us.
Literally legally couldn't own a bank account on their own or whole property. Like that
was our parents' generation.
Yes. Yeah. People are alive today who growing up, they couldn't have their own bank account without a man. And that's crazy to me. So a lot of those things are still in place, even if it's not legally that way anymore. Fathers would have conversations with their sons and not their daughters. So women grew up not having those conversations, and that just carries through into adulthood. And so part of it is, we need to change that. So we need to be making sure we're having those conversations with our sons and daughters about household finances and investing and saving and all of those things, so that they grow up not hearing two different things. So I think that's a really important one. Another one, I mean, we kind of talked about this already, but the perceived taboo around money, kind of just society being like, ooh, it's like money and politics, right? Like you don't talk about it. Or religion, right? It's one of those like hot topics. The other one that I thought was really interesting, that the last one that ChatGPT said, was prioritizing others over themselves. The idea that women are socialized to care for others before themselves. Yeah. And I think that then talking about money can maybe be perceived as selfish. And I think that's where the reframing comes in, is the money conversation can be about caring for others. It can be about caring for aging parents. It can be about helping your kids pay for school. It can be about making sure your family is taken care of. Like, life insurance is the least selfish thing you can do, because you're not there to have it, right? It's for who's left when you're gone. That is literally caring for others. So just reframing some of those conversations about money of like, hey, if you want to take care of your family, sometimes being financially savvy is actually the way to do that.
Right. And it's not necessarily just like financially taking care of them. It's passing on the knowledge of how to do that to the future generations. We actually had a podcast about that like a year or so ago, where we talked about that, right? Like the importance of getting women into the financial industry to, help facilitate those conversations for future generations. And that's like kind of part of what we want to talk about. But I think a lot of it is just like, what do we need to do? How do we need to reframe these conversations so they are more comfortable, so that people feel like they're being heard and seen? One other thing that we talked about too, and this really hit home, especially personally for me, is making financial topics interesting. Because a lot of the times people will hear what we do and they're like, oh, okay. And, it's not what they're interested in, quite frankly. Yeah. And that's totally fine. You know, it's not for everybody. But it is such an important part of everyone's lives that, we want to be able to help our clients and help our peers and whoever else is, listening to this series, that they should feel like, just because it's not interesting doesn't mean it's not important. Yes. And you should feel like you can figure out what is interesting to you. And a lot of that came down to the goals. The goals are what is interesting, and how do we make those conversations, again, reframed so that there is purpose behind what we're doing. Because we're not just saving or not just investing. We're worried about a rate of return. Yes, but why? Yeah. Right? Why are we worried about that rate of return? Why are we worried about what's happening, with the Fed? Why are we worried about what's happening with the markets, around any certain, nuanced conversation? Why are we worried about it? What does it mean for you? But what does it mean for you specifically in terms of how do you reframe that for your personal conversations that you're having amongst your friend group, your family, your children, whatnot? Yeah.
And it's really, the studies have shown too that women are more, like when they engage in financial planning, they're more interested in what they can achieve with the money than what rate of return they're getting or what investments that they're in. And again, that's, a generalization, because I'm certainly very concerned with both of those things. But at the end of the day, like, what's important to me, and I think what's important to a lot of people, is that they can do the things that they want to do in their life. I have a client who, her big thing is, she was really focused on a dollar amount. And I kind of was like pushing more like, well, if you had that much money, what would you do with it? Like, great. Okay. You have $10 million. Now what? Like, what do you feel that would allow you to do that the amount of money you have today doesn't let you do? And one of her things was buy a first class plane ticket. And I was like, I love that. She's like, I love travel. I love, just going abroad. That's important. I like taking family vacations. And she just really wants to buy a first class plane ticket. And to her, that was kind of like when she knew she made it sort of thing, or when she knew she felt financially comfortable enough to do something like that. And so figuring out what is that for people. And it's like, okay, great. That's what you want to do. Well, we can include that in your plan. We can show you the things that you need to do to get there. And sometimes people think things like that are out of reach. Oh, I could never retire early. Oh, I could never afford to do that. Well, maybe you can, right? Maybe you can. And figuring out what are those things that are important to you that you want to do, and working backwards from it a little bit and saying, okay, well, how much does that cost? And how does that, how much would you need to save in order to get there? Or what other things would you need to adjust in your life in order to get there? So I think sometimes just having those conversations and helping people realize, what are those goals? What is the purpose behind those money conversations?
Yeah. And that's, again, the purpose. And that's kind of, again, last few minutes here, what we want to do with this segment is each episode kind of talk about one of those goals, right? What is that thing, whether it's life insurance, investing with our values, charitable giving,
paying for kids' college,
helping support your parents as they're growing older, stuff like that. Taking those conversations or those goals and kind of flipping them and talking about them in a way that makes them more attainable. Just having the conversation more attainable.
Because it can be overwhelming. Right? Like, especially the generation of women and men who feel like the sandwich generation, right? They have aging parents and they're worried about taking care of their parents, whether that's long-term care, assisted living, whatever health concerns their parents are having. But then also they're raising kids and they were like, well, I want to save and help my kids go to college. I don't want them to graduate with how much debt I have. And so really you're juggling multiple goals and you're saying, how can I most efficiently use my money to achieve all of them? Or how do I prioritize them?
Yeah.
Cause I always tell clients, don't sacrifice your retirement savings in order to save for your kids' college, because your kids can borrow for college, but you can't borrow for retirement.
Yeah.
And also, again, kind of reframing it from that, like, caring for others mindset. Because if you run out of money in retirement, who is going to be on the hook for taking care of you? Your kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So saving for retirement is actually doing your kids a favor. That is a gift, I think, to tell your kids, I'm okay. You don't have to worry about taking care of me, and not everyone's able to do that. And I think that if you can, that's really great. And maybe you didn't pay for 100% of their college, but you gave them the peace of mind that they're not going to have to take care of you when you get old from a financial perspective. Right. Yeah. Like, we're not, dropping off our parents and at the nursing home and speeding away. Maybe you are, I don't know. But, you want to have the option. You don't want to end up in the point where the only option is maybe to move back in with your kids, for example. So, that's the thing. Money can give you options. Money can help you take care of your family, and how do we talk about it with those things in mind? Yeah.
So, Alicia, I'm looking forward to kind of diving into all these topics a little bit more with you over the next
so excited.
Few podcast episodes.
Yes.
I think it's going to be really helpful just, for us internally as we, approach conversations with our clients, also with our friend groups, our families, everything beyond that. But I think it'll be good. And I hope we can, help people essentially understand that this can be really interesting because it can help you achieve things that you probably never thought you'd be able to.
And ask the question. Yeah. Even if you think they're dumb, ask the question. It's probably not a dumb question. It's probably a really good question. And it'll probably lead to other questions. And that's how you gain more knowledge. My friends always apologize. Oh, I'm sorry to ask you about this. It's your job. And I was like, I love my job. I will talk about this all day long. It's not a dumb question. You're not boring me. Totally fine. Please come ask your friends, start having those conversations. Because if you're wondering it, someone else probably is too. And you may go to your friend group and ask that question and have somebody else be like, oh my gosh, I was also wondering that and I didn't want to ask, or I didn't know how to, or thought it was stupid. And it's not. So go ask the questions.
Yeah. Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks everyone.
Walkner Condon Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Walkner Condon Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Thanks for listening, and for further information, please visit WalknerCondon.com.